She walked into the luxury car dealership in faded jeans and a simple white t-shirt, her hair neatly tied at the back, her gaze calm yet determined. "Hello, I'm interested in the black coupe in the corner," she said, her voice soft but firm. The sales manager, hair slicked back, perfectly fitted suit, and eyes that couldn't hide his disdain, looked her up and down, then chuckled. "Sorry, but are you sure you're in the right place?" He gestured toward the door, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The cars here aren't for people to just look at for fun. The starting price is $300,000. The quiet laughter of a few other staff members rang out like a cut to her self-respect. A few customers turned to stare, their gazes judgmental without saying a word. She said nothing. She simply tightened the strap of her bag and walked out. But just one day later, as the dealership opened, a midnight pearl Rolls-Royce Phantom quietly slid into the parking lot like the shadow of a warning. The back door opened, and the man who stepped out left the entire showroom stunned. He never saw it coming. No one saw it coming. Because this time, she didn't come back alone. Jasmine Turner, 32, walked into the dealership with a mix of hesitation and resolve. She wore a simple white t-shirt, faded jeans, and worn-out Converse shoes with frayed edges. No makeup, her hair tied up, revealing a sun-kissed forehead. In her hand, she carried a neat stack of papers, detailed information about the car she'd been researching for the past 2 weeks. No one knew that Jasmine had been a rehabilitation counselor for disabled children, and now worked multiple jobs to support her 6-year-old daughter and care for her sister recovering from stage 2 breast cancer. She was here for one reason only: to find a car that was beautiful, powerful, and meaningful enough to gift her sister as a reward for the survival battle they had fought together. But as soon as she stepped through the large glass door, Jasmine felt the atmosphere shift. At the reception, a young staff member raised an eyebrow, quickly pretending to look at the screen after glancing at her outfit. A salesperson whispered to a colleague, then burst out laughing. And, from the corner of the showroom, Ethan Grant, the senior sales manager known for his quick closing skills and strong biases, stood up from his chair as if disturbed during lunch. Ethan, in his early 40s, with slicked-back hair, a tailored expensive suit, and shoes so shiny they could reflect the room, looked at Jasmine for less than a second, but enough to pass judgment. He walked over, his voice half polite, half mocking. "Sorry, who are you looking for here?" Jasmine smiled faintly. "I'm interested in the Midnight Onyx Coupe, the limited edition. I saw on the website that it's still available." Ethan smirked. "That one? The starting price is $287,000, not including tax and optional add-ons. I'm afraid you might want to take a look at the used cars across the street." A female staff member behind him suppressed a laugh, and a middle-aged man admiring a Bentley turned to look Jasmine up and down. She kept her composure, but her dark eyes lowered slightly, not out of shame, but to hold back the rising anger. Jasmine was used to this kind of treatment, but it never felt easier. "I'd like to see the interior of that car, if possible," she said clearly, not asking for permission, not begging. Ethan sighed dramatically, as though he were doing her a favor. "That one's by appointment only. Serious customers usually call ahead or have legal representation." He looked Jasmine over again, this time more carefully, his eyes lingering on the creased edges of her shirt, the frayed seams of her jeans, and her shoes that looked like they'd just left a gas station. No one in the room knew that Jasmine had sold her mother's condo share to scrape together money for this car. No one knew that she had once held a full scholarship at Stanford University, but left it behind to care for her sister and daughter when her ex-boyfriend disappeared without a word. No one knew that she wasn't poor. She simply didn't see the need to dress rich to earn respect. Jasmine didn't say another word. She nodded slightly, turned, and walked out the door. The glass door swung open with a soft chime. She felt their eyes on her back, not with sympathy, but with mockery. But as she stepped into the sunlight, Jasmine didn't cry. Her lips pressed together, and her eyes quietly reflected something Ethan and those like him had never seen in the underqualified customers. The resolve to come back, not to buy the car, but to teach them a lesson about real value. She walked in the sunlight, her back straight, her steps unhurried. But each step on the sidewalk seemed heavier, not because of her old shoes, but because of the feeling of being cast aside, as if she was never good enough to be respected in a world of shiny cars and fake handshakes. That world had never understood her, and it hadn't even bothered to try. When she arrived back at the third-floor apartment in the Northwood suburb where she and her daughter Maya lived, Jasmine placed the folder on the wooden table and poured herself a glass of water. The afternoon light streamed through the window, illuminating a picture frame on the shelf, an old photo that had faded over time. The picture showed Jasmine at 21, smiling brightly in the arms of a young, tall, and confident man. His hair fell over his forehead, and his eyes gleamed with determination. Damian Cole. She gently stroked the photo. A part of her heart still lingered in those old days, the days when they, two young people, dreamed of the world they would build together before everything fell apart because of an unexpected piece of news. Jasmine was pregnant. At that time, Damian had just secured his first venture capital investment for a green energy tech project. He was scared, not because he didn't love her, but because he didn't know how to be both an inventor and a father. So, he withdrew. No proper explanation, no kind farewell hug. Just a short text, "I can't. I'm sorry." Years had passed, and Jasmine no longer blamed him. There had been times when she resented him, aching, tossing and turning in the lonely nights, pregnant with no one by her side. But over time, through each day of caring for her daughter, through each time she helped a disabled child learn to walk or hold a pencil, she realized that pain didn't kill compassion. It nurtured it, making it fertile ground for empathy to grow. Jasmine had once worked at a therapy center in Southside, where most of the patients were children born into poverty, abandoned by their families or severely disabled. She wasn't just a rehabilitation instructor. She was their anchor, their first laughter in a world that had never known kindness. It was there that Jasmine learned that silent but steadfast presence was stronger than any degree or promise. Now, she ran a community group called Hope Walkers, which supported autistic children and children with developmental disabilities in low-income families. Although the funds were limited, Jasmine persevered every day, organizing weekend play sessions, teaching parents how to intervene at home, and fighting for children to be treated like the human beings they were. She might not have a luxury car or wear designer clothes, but she had something that people like Ethan Grant would never understand. Human worth isn't found in a leather wallet. It's found in the heart that knows how to put itself in the place of the weak. And what about Ethan? Ethan Grant wasn't a one-dimensional villain. He didn't shout, didn't act rudely, but he embodied a kind of covert power that was very American. Discrimination legitimized by a social smile and a pricey suit. Born into an upper-middle-class family, Ethan went to private schools and got into college through connections. He wasn't a bad person, but he'd never really had to struggle for anything. And like most people used to living in a safe bubble, Ethan feared difference. He didn't hate Jasmine. He looked down on her because she broke the unspoken system he believed everyone had to follow. Dress right, speak right, act right. To Ethan, serious meant like me. Anyone who wasn't like him didn't belong. That's why, when Jasmine walked into the showroom, He didn't see a strong mother, didn't see a woman who had sacrificed her personal dreams to care for her sister and raise her daughter alone. He only saw a poor woman, and that was enough for him to push her out of the luxurious picture he was painting for potential customers. That night, when Maya was asleep, Jasmine sat alone on the small balcony. The cold wind slipped through her thin jacket. She opened her laptop and accessed an old account, one she had never deleted, like a half-closed door she was too afraid to open. She typed in the address bar, Damian at coltech.com. Hesitated, deleted, rewrote. Just 3 lines. Do you have time tomorrow? I'm not coming because I need something. I'm coming because someone needs to see clearly what you once told me. True value is not in the exterior. She hit send. Then gently, she closed the laptop. The night wind blew through the lavender outside the balcony. Jasmine closed her eyes. She didn't know if he would come or not, but this time she didn't need him to save her. She needed him to prove to the world that she was not wrong. Jasmine couldn't sleep that night, but the next morning she still woke up early. The soft sunlight filtered through the curtains and brushed her cheek as she tied her curly hair into a neat bun. She put on the same clothes as yesterday, not out of stubbornness, but because of principle. If she returned in a beautiful dress, red lipstick, and high heels, the lesson would lose its value. They would think she had just been taught how to dress properly. No, they had to see the same woman, and this time they would have to see her differently. Jasmine walked back into Montclair Prestige Motors, looking unchanged but with a much clearer purpose, to finish the unfinished car purchase, and to witness their reaction when they saw who was standing behind her. Ethan Grant was standing at the consultation desk, holding an espresso cup and smiling politely at a middle-aged gentleman in a gray suit who had just signed a deposit for an Aston Martin. Spotting Jasmine through the mirror, his eyes faltered for just a second. Ethan thought she had returned because she had dreamed too big. "Back again, are we?" he said, his voice tinged with annoyance despite maintaining his professional smile. "I think I made it clear yesterday. The Midnight Onyx Coupe is a pre-order vehicle. We only attend to customers by appointment." Jasmine kept her composure. "I'd like to see the interior. If possible, I'll buy it today." Ethan chuckled briefly and shook his head. "This is a limited edition coupe. The price after tax is nearly $295,000. Normally, those who are serious would call ahead, put down a deposit, or at least know how to dress appropriately when entering a place like this." He said the last part with a thin smile, but his eyes held a clear implication. You don't belong here. At that moment, a couple walked in, the man wearing a white blazer and a Cartier watch, the woman in red Louboutin heels, blonde hair in waves, and Chanel sunglasses. Ethan immediately changed his demeanor. His smile grew wider, his arms spread as if welcoming long-lost relatives. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore. It's such a pleasure to see you again." Ignoring Jasmine as if she were completely invisible, Ethan turned and guided the couple toward the Midnight Onyx Coupe, which was displayed on a rotating pedestal. He stepped forward, courteously opening the driver's door to invite Mrs. Whitmore into the car. The same car he had just claimed could not be viewed without an appointment. Jasmine stood silently observing. She didn't need to record a video, didn't need evidence, because what she was feeling was a living system of prejudice, expressed through veiled words, and in the way a man valued a leather bag over the worth of a human being. From the other corner of the showroom, Kenny, the young salesman Jasmine remembered had smiled at her yesterday, was watching the scene. Hesitantly, he approached. "Miss Jasmine, sorry to interrupt, but if you're still interested in the coupe, I can give you a more detailed introduction if you'd like." Jasmine turned to him, the first smile of the day blooming on her face. "Thank you, I'd love to hear more." As Kenny began to describe the V8 hybrid engine, mocha Italian leather interior, and the advanced traction control system, Jasmine nodded along, listening to every detail as someone who truly understood the value of the product. Not to show off, but to know if the gift for her sister was truly worth it. On the other side, Ethan was performing his dedication to the Whitmores, pouring champagne and discussing exclusive order options. But his eyes kept darting toward Jasmine, and especially toward Kenny. His face tightened when he saw her still standing there, calm, receiving the consultation like any ordinary customer, as if she had the right to be here. Jasmine smiled at Kenny. "Thank you, that was really helpful." Then she slowly turned and walked toward Ethan, who was leaning against the coupe with a champagne glass in hand. She stopped 3 steps away from him, her voice steady. "I'd like to ask again, is this car for sale?" Ethan set the glass down, his gaze sharp as ice. "As I said, I'm attending to a serious customer." Jasmine didn't step back, didn't raise her voice. "I am a serious customer, and I want to buy this car, in cash." The air seemed to freeze. Ethan laughed, this time not hiding the sarcasm. "Cash? You think this is a flea market? This car is almost $300,000. The people who can afford it, they don't wear Walmart clothes, they don't wear $20 shoes, and they don't carry a ragged folder." Jasmine's face shifted slightly, but she didn't respond. She just nodded slowly, as if she had heard exactly what she needed to hear. She turned away, took her phone from her pocket. Her hand trembled slightly from the adrenaline, but her gaze remained focused. She dialed a familiar number and pressed the phone to her ear. On the other side of the city, in a 34th floor glass office, a man looked up as the phone rang. The screen displayed the one name he would never forget, Jasmine. And when he heard her voice, not pleading, not angry, but calm, he knew immediately. She wasn't calling to beg, she was calling to prove something. The sound from the phone just ended, and Jasmine stood there, not far from the midnight onyx coupe, in a showroom full of skeptical eyes. She didn't waver, nor did she lower her head. But the way she stood silent, it made the air around her seem to slow down, as if it was suffocating. Ethan Grant, adjusting his blazer collar, walked toward her with a tight-lipped smile. A feeling of frustration rose inside him, but he kept it hidden beneath a cold politeness. "So, what are you really here for?" he asked, no longer keeping his voice low. "Looking for attention, or just here to see the car and take a few pictures for social media like some unattainable dream?" Jasmine didn't respond. Her eyes simply followed him, not challenging but seeing right through him. Ethan crossed his arms over his chest, stepping a bit closer, his words sharp and forceful. "I've been in this industry for 16 years, Miss Turner. I know what real customers with money look like. They don't come here wearing faded t-shirts and wet shoes. They have appointments. They have an attitude. And most of all, they don't pretend to have money." Some customers in the showroom started to notice. An older man, who was looking at a car, turned his head, while a young receptionist hesitated in her step. From the far corner, Kenny, the young salesman, stood frozen, his eyes on Ethan as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Jasmine took a deep breath. She wasn't afraid of Ethan. She had faced hospitals with no medicine for autistic children, single mothers wanting to give up, and the look on her daughter's face when she asked, "Mom, why do people look at me like that?" She was used to being looked down upon, but Ethan, he didn't just look down on her. He was publicly declaring that she didn't belong here. Jasmine slightly tilted her head, her voice as soft as the wind. "So, are you saying I should go back to a place that's appropriate for me. Ethan nodded, as if she had finally understood the point. What I mean is, if you really want a car, our used car lot has some models that might be more within your budget. A soft ding rang out. The main door of the showroom opened. A middle-aged couple walked in. The receptionist immediately ran to greet them, the sound of high heels echoing sharply. But no one in the center of the room paid attention to them. All eyes were on Jasmine, the single mother in a white t-shirt, standing in the midst of million-dollar cars and judgmental gazes. She raised her head. Her eyes were no longer quiet. They shone, resolute, not to confront, but to finish. "Mr. Grant," she said slowly, "I didn't come here to be given a favor. I came here because I want to buy a gift for my sister, who has just fought for her life against cancer for 2 years. And I chose this car because she deserves something special, not just for conquering the disease, but because she taught me that no one should be looked down upon just because they look different from you." The air in the room seemed to tighten. Ethan maintained his smile, but something in his eyes began to crack. Part of it was embarrassment. Part of it was the feeling that his power was being threatened. "I understand the sentiment," he said, his voice softer but insincere. "But sentiment doesn't buy cars. Here, we work with facts." "And I am very factual," Jasmine replied. "I'm factual enough to know that if I wore a suit and carried a Hermes bag today, you'd have taken me on a private tour, offered me coffee, and opened the trunk. But because I dress like an ordinary mother, you've chosen to belittle me, instead of serving me as a customer." Ethan didn't respond. He stood still, trying to control his expression. But at that moment a sound came from behind, the steady click of expensive leather shoes across the hallway. A tall figure walked in from the main door, saying nothing. The room fell silent immediately. The man wore a white dress shirt with a stiff collar, dark trousers, and neatly groomed salt-and-pepper hair. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe watch gleamed in the sunlight. His gaze was sharp as a blade, but his voice was low, steady, and deep. "Hello, I'm here by appointment." Jasmine turned her head. Her heart skipped a beat, but her face remained unchanged. Damian Cole had just walked into the room where she had been humiliated. And this time, he wasn't here to love her again, but to stand by her as a living witness to what she had always believed. True value doesn't come from outward appearances. It comes from how we face contempt. Damian Cole walked into the showroom like a knife cutting through the suffocating air surrounding Jasmine. No one spoke, no one greeted him. They didn't know how to handle the appearance of this man. Only Ethan Grant, standing less than 3 steps away, flinched and took half a step back as Damian's gaze landed on his face, sharp as a blade, contemplating the cut. Damian didn't speak immediately. He only gave a slight nod to Jasmine, a nod not for greeting, but as if to say he received the message, and he understood why she called. That afternoon, when the storm had settled, Jasmine returned to her small 2-bedroom apartment in the Northwood suburb, where the kitchen wall still bore stains from a rainstorm 3 months ago, and the lavender pot on the balcony hadn't been replanted. The apartment was modest, but it was the only safe world Jasmine had built since those days, raising her child alone in silence. She sat down at the old wooden desk, the desk that had once been her study desk in college. She opened the left drawer, pulled out a small, square, weathered wooden box. Inside was a thin silver ring, engraved with the word "Breathe," a gift from Damian on her 22nd birthday. It was the time when they both dreamed about changing the world. He had held her hand on a winter night in Boston and whispered, "When things feel overwhelming, take a deep breath and remember you are not alone." But then, he was the first to leave. She once thought she would throw the ring away. She had taken it to the riverbank, raised her hand to throw it. But what kept her from letting go wasn't the lost love. It was the reminder that she had once been truly seen, really seen, by someone, even if it was just for a brief moment. Jasmine didn't call Damian to plead for help. She didn't need to be rescued in the showroom. But when she was belittled just for how she dressed, when she was assumed to be poor, to not belong to the class that could afford to buy a car, she realized if she stayed silent, others would continue to be trampled on, with no response whatsoever. She called Damian not because he was a billionaire. She called him because he was the only witness to the person she once was, and still was, until today. On the phone screen, the words appeared. Call successful. 1 minute 34 seconds. Just enough for Jasmine to say, tomorrow 10 a.m. Montclair Prestige Motors. And Damian simply replied, I'll be there. No need to ask why. No need for more words. In the years following their breakup, Damian had built a green energy tech empire called Coltech Industries, now valued at over $7 billion. He became a symbol of the young, self-made entrepreneur generation, invited to speak at Davos, TED Talks, and appeared on the cover of Forbes 3 times in a row. But no one knew that. In all of the accolades, there was a gap he could never fill. Jasmine. Damian had truly loved her so much that he cowardly walked away when he realized he wasn't mature enough to hold on to her. He ran, claiming he needed to focus on his career, but the truth was, he was afraid he wasn't good enough to be a father, a husband, a man worthy of a strong woman like her. For 10 years, he had never had the courage to write an apology email. But yesterday, when he received Jasmine's message, just a few lines, no reproach, no bitterness, he felt his chest tighten. She still remembered him, but not to love him again, but to remind him of the man he had lost long ago. Jasmine sat silently for a long time. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock, slow and steady. Her daughter, Maya, was napping in the room next door, holding the brown teddy bear she had given her on her 6th birthday. Next to it was a drawing Maya had made. Mom is my hero. Jasmine pressed her lips together. She knew tomorrow wouldn't be easy. She would walk into the place that had made her feel the smallest, in front of the man who had abandoned her when she was at her weakest. But this time she wasn't going back to be seen. She was going back to make them, all of them, see. Not for her, but for all the people like her. Ordinary, silent, but never inferior. Jasmine hadn't expected Damian to respond to the letter. She wasn't waiting for a promise, nor did she need a confirmation. But she knew one thing for sure. If he was still the man she once knew, he would come. And he came. At 9:58 a.m. the next morning, a midnight pearl Rolls-Royce Phantom silently glided down Montclair Avenue, coming to a stop before the gleaming glass doors of Montclair Prestige Motors. No honking, no fanfare. Only a driver in a black suit stepping out quietly, precisely opening the rear door as if it had been practiced for a lifetime. And then Damian Cole stepped out. No one in the showroom recognized him right away. He wasn't the flashy billionaire type. The light gray suit had no big brand logos. The charcoal Italian leather shoes weren't shining. But there was one unmistakable thing: his gaze. The gaze of someone accustomed to running multi-million-dollar meetings. Someone who had mastered making others listen when he spoke. Ethan Grant was standing at the reception desk, wearing a Bluetooth earpiece, guiding a VIP customer who was placing a deposit for a Range Rover autobiography. When he saw the Rolls pull up in front of the showroom, he squinted with excitement. A Phantom wasn't unusual here, but the way it stopped, silently, as if signaling something about to happen, made him uneasy. As Damian walked through the glass door, the light from the ceiling reflected off the cufflinks on his sleeves. Not dazzling, but enough to make Ethan falter mid-sentence. "Yes, I will. Sorry, I have a new customer. I'll call you back." He removed the earpiece, adjusted his tie, and strode toward the man who had just entered. "Good morning, sir," Ethan quickly greeted, flashing a professional smile. "Ethan Grant, showroom manager. It's an honor to welcome you to Montclair today." Damian stopped in front of him, scanning the space. He wasn't in a hurry, not rushing. Just a quick glance over the corners, like a judge observing a test whose results he already knew. "I'm here for a car," Damian said, his voice low and clear, neither high nor low, but instantly causing the whole room to stop and listen. Ethan smiled wider, stepping back as if to offer more space. Of course. We have an exclusive selection. Aston, Bentley, Ferrari, Rolls. Is there a particular model you're looking for?" Damian glanced toward the display pedestal in the middle of the room, where the midnight onyx coupe was slowly rotating under the yellow lights. "I believe that one," he said, pointing. "Ah, wonderful!" Ethan exclaimed. "This coupe is a limited edition, only 15 units nationwide, with a V8 hybrid engine, 560 horsepower, hand-stitched Italian leather interior, and custom midnight onyx color." Damian cut him off. "I know, my ex-wife was very fond of it." Ethan blinked. For a moment he hesitated, then tried to make conversation. "In that case, you have quite an eye for aesthetics. Allow me to take you to see the car up close." But Damian didn't move. He stopped, his eyes locking onto Ethan's, as if he was about to begin a lesson that the student would never forget. "Was it yesterday that a woman named Jasmine Turner came here asking about this car?" Ethan furrowed his brow, still trying to maintain his friendly demeanor. "Yes, possibly. I don't remember every customer. She was wearing a white t-shirt, faded jeans, and worn-out shoes. She was holding a folder and requested to see the car." "Yes," Ethan hesitated. "But she didn't have an appointment, and to be honest, she didn't seem like someone who could afford this kind of car. Do you know who Jasmine is?" The question fell like a judgment. Ethan stood frozen. No, he didn't know. He had just thought of her as a poor mother dreaming too big. Damian pulled out his phone, opened a photo. It was Jasmine at a Hope Walkers charity event last year, standing among disabled children who were hugging her. He held the screen out. "This is Jasmine. She is the founder and operator of the largest non-profit supporting disabled children in the Northeast. She once saved the son of a friend of mine from depression after an accident. She's the reason I believe that kindness can create greater change than any technology." Ethan's face went pale. Behind them, staff members began whispering. A few curious customers stopped to look. Kenny, too, stood frozen in the corner of the room, lips tightly pressed together. He was the only one not surprised. Damian lowered his phone. His voice was no longer cold, but calm to the point of being terrifying. "And yesterday you told her that she doesn't belong here. That people with money don't dress like her. That she should go look at used cars across the street." Ethan stammered. I didn't mean that. I just thought—" Damian interrupted again, his gaze like a knife cutting. "No, you didn't think. You judged. You dismissed someone with a shallow glance, with your narrow personal measure, someone who has never had to fight to be seen." Jasmine entered from the side door. No words, no drama. She just stood silently, 3 steps away from Damian, like a part of the past coming alive. But this time not for love, but for validation. Damian looked straight at Ethan one last time. "I'm here to buy the car, but I'm also here to change the way you see people." And I don't need you to like that. I just need you to understand. True value is never in a jacket, but in how you treat someone you don't think matters. But then, the cheerful atmosphere that had briefly enveloped Ethan suddenly froze when Damian dropped his words like a sharp blade. My ex-wife was very fond of this car, and she was humiliated right here. The entire showroom went silent. A pen slipped from the hand of the receptionist, hitting the floor with a faint sound, and strangely, that small noise rang out in the heavy atmosphere, exposing the terrifying silence that had trapped everyone. Ethan stood there, his face drained of color. What had started as a dream sale was now turning into a public verdict. He tried to rebut, but when he saw Jasmine's gaze, which had just entered, calm, clear, not hostile, not condemning, but looking straight into him as if searching the darkest part of his soul, he instinctively swallowed all his words. I didn't know who she was, I thought. And that's the problem, Damian coldly interrupted. You thought. You judged based on appearances, then took it upon yourself to decide the worth of others. He turned to Jasmine. She was still standing there, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes no longer pained, but as still as water after a storm. The stillness of someone who had endured humiliation without losing their dignity. Do you know, Ethan? Jasmine spoke, her voice not loud but ringing like a bell in an empty church. I'm not angry that you didn't sell me the car. I'm angry that you thought you had the right to belittle me just because of the way I choose to live. Ethan tried to say something, but this time, Kenny, the young salesman who had been silent the entire time, stepped forward. Miss Jasmine is right. Yesterday, she clearly expressed interest in the coupe, but you kept ignoring her. Even called me over to hand her a brochure. I was standing there, and I saw it all. Ethan turned to Kenny, his eyes burning with anger. You don't understand. You're new to this job. Exactly because I'm new, Kenny cut in, his voice sharpening. I still know how to respect customers with my gaze, not by the watch they wear or the brand of shoes they have on. A soft murmur spread through the room. Many customers had stopped shopping and now stood together, silently observing. A middle-aged woman whispered to her husband, "That girl is a single mother, isn't she? Oh my, I saw her at a disability conference last year." Damian glanced around. He didn't need to say anything more. The conclusion was already forming. At that moment, the back office door opened. Richard Maddox, the CEO of Montclair Prestige Motors, stepped out, adjusting his tie, frowning as he sensed the strange atmosphere. "What's going on here, Ethan?" Damian turned to him, his voice still calm but with a force that made the entire room hold its breath. "Are you the manager here?" "Yes, I'm Richard Maddox. Sorry, but I wasn't aware of the situation." "Well, let me help you understand," Damian said. "Yesterday, my ex-wife, Jasmine Turner, the founder of Hope Walkers, came into this showroom to buy a car. She was turned away, humiliated, and disrespected just because of the way she dressed." Richard immediately turned to look at Ethan. The tension in his eyes was no longer hidden. I didn't know Jasmine was treated like that. Ethan, is that true?" Ethan couldn't speak any more. His mouth moved, but every word seemed to choke on the weight of the truth surrounding him. He had misjudged the only woman in the room who had true dignity. Damian lowered his voice, but each word fell like a hammer on the table. "Jasmine doesn't need me to defend her, but I'm here to remind all of you, value isn't in t-shirts or worn-out shoes. Value is in how a person lives, loves, and treats the world around them, even when the world turns its back." Jasmine looked at Damian. For the first time in years, there was no distance in her gaze. It was simply recognition. He had changed, but I was never wrong to believe in the man he could become. The room sank into silence, a kind of silence where there was no room for reasons or excuses, a silence that signified everything had changed. No one looked at Jasmine as an outsider anymore. No one sneered at her worn shoes. They no longer saw just a woman. They saw a living symbol of what few dared to demand: unconditional respect. And the man who had once abandoned her now stood doing what was right, something the world had owed her for far too long. The last words of Damian hung in the air, like a precise cut through the glossy layers of fake politeness. The entire showroom fell silent. Ethan Grant, who just minutes ago had been as confident as though he were directing a stage, now seemed frozen, caught under the gazes of the customers, the staff, and his own conscience. Damian didn't allow the silence to linger. He stepped forward, his voice steady, yet each word etched deep. "I didn't come here for the car. I came on behalf of a woman you insulted yesterday." Ethan flinched as if slapped, his brow furrowed. He tried to force a smile, trying to salvage the situation. "I'm sorry. I'm not sure who you're referring to. We serve many clients every day." Damian stopped right in front of him. No shouting, but his gaze alone made Ethan take half a step back. Jasmine Turner. The name fell like a stone, breaking the stillness of the pond. Ethan stood motionless, his face revealing a small panic he couldn't hide. His hands clenched at his sides. Then, as though trying to justify himself, "Ah, yes, I remember now. She's the one in the white suit and old jeans? Actually, I was just trying to categorize clients based on standards, to ensure efficiency in our work." "No, you were trying to protect your own biased ego," Damian interrupted, his voice low but sharp. "You weren't categorizing clients, you were judging them." At this moment, from behind the front desk, Kenny, the young employee who had been tense the whole time, suddenly stepped forward. His voice shook but remained firm. "Excuse me, I think I need to speak up." Damian turned to look at Kenny, nodding slightly. "Yesterday, I was the first to talk to Ms. Jasmine," Kenny said, his eyes fixed on Richard Maddox, the showroom manager. "She was very polite, very clear about wanting to look at the Midnight Onyx coupe. I was about to show her the car when Mr. Ethan came over, cut me off, and told me to step back." Ethan spun around, his voice harsh. "Kenny, you don't understand how we operate here. You're too green. And because I'm green, I still have a conscience." The words struck Ethan like a punch in front of the entire dealership. "I witnessed you reject her 3 times, Kenny continued. "You said the car was only available by appointment, but then turned around and invited another customer to sit in the same car. You said, 'Serious customers don't dress like she does.' And you laughed when she said she wanted to pay in cash." Murmurs rose from the other employees, then spread to the group of customers standing near the SUV display. Some frowned. Others looked at Ethan as if seeing his true nature for the first time. Richard Maddox frowned, clearly bewildered. He turned to Ethan. "Ethan, if what Kenny is saying is true, you've gone too far." "I was just following the procedure," Ethan defended, his voice now trembling. "Here we always prioritize customers with potential." "Let me tell you about potential," Damian interrupted, his gaze no longer just cold, but angry. "Jasmine Turner is the founder of Hope Walkers, a nonprofit that has donated over $12 million to child therapy programs across the Northeast. She was honored by the United Nations. She's the woman who single-handedly raised a child and built a network for children with autism from scratch. And yesterday, you, in your suit, told her she wasn't worthy of stepping into this room." No one breathed. Ethan stammered, I didn't know. If I had known she was someone so important, I would have. And if she wasn't anyone important? Jasmine finally spoke, stepping up beside Damian. Her voice wasn't sharp, but there was a deep, concealed pain. If I were just an ordinary single mother, I still wouldn't deserve to be treated like trash. What you did wasn't wrong because I'm the founder of an organization or because I know him. What you did wrong was thinking you had the right to decide who deserves respect. Ethan lowered his head. For the first time, he had no argument to escape. His face turned pale, his voice small, as if choked. I'm sorry. No, Jasmine shook her head. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to the people you will judge in the future if you don't change. The atmosphere was heavy, as if pressing down on every corner of the room. A female customer quietly placed her keys on the table and walked out. A technician turned away, wiping the car windows, his hands visibly shaking. Damian looked at Richard Maddox. I didn't come to demand compensation. But if Montclair wants to survive, you need more than an apology. You need change. Richard nodded slowly. At that moment, he was no longer the showroom manager. He was a man who had been forced to confront the hard truth about the organization he ran. The silence returned. But not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a truth just laid bare. And someone from the crowd quietly clapped. One clap, then two, then three. It wasn't applause, it wasn't dramatic, it was a kind of acknowledgement. A silent thank you. Jasmine didn't bow her head. She didn't need to. They had seen her. And this time, it was with real eyes. The applause just ended, but the air in the showroom still felt suffocating, waiting for what would come next. Every eye was on Damian, not because he was a billionaire, but because of the way he stood there, back straight, unapologetic, as if he himself was shedding a mask. Damian looked at Jasmine. A brief moment of hesitation, then he turned fully to face the silent crowd. I've been silent for too long, and I think perhaps it's time to speak, not just for Jasmine, but for myself. People slowly stopped moving. Ethan stood frozen. Richard Maddox could only lower his head, lips pressed tight, unable to speak. Damian took a deep breath. Jasmine Turner was the one who changed my entire life. Not with money, not with fame, but by the way she saw me when I couldn't see myself. A young female employee put her pen down on the desk, her eyes glistening with tears. In the far corner of the showroom, Kenny was stunned, his lips barely moving, almost whispering along with each word. Damian continued, his voice steady, but each word held an unstoppable force. When I failed for the first time in my career, when the investors pulled out, when the media criticized, when my friends turned their backs, Jasmine was the only one who stayed. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She gave me dinner, a blank notebook, and said, "If you still believe in that dream, then start writing again." He paused for a moment, his eyes fixed on Ethan, who was sweating, then lowered his voice as if wanting every word to sink deeper. And then I betrayed that belief. When Jasmine got pregnant, I left, because I was afraid, I wasn't ready. I said I needed time, but the truth is, I chose selfishness. Jasmine didn't lower her head. She stood still, her gaze softened, but she didn't shed a tear. This wasn't the confession of a man to her, but the awakening of someone who had lost everything and was learning how to take responsibility. Damian turned to Ethan once more. His voice was resolute, unmistakable. And yesterday, you did what I once did, but worse. You discarded the dignity of an extraordinary woman, just because of worn-out shoes. The showroom seemed to fall into a deep, silent abyss. Ethan no longer hid behind his professional smile. His face began to lose the polished mask it usually wore, exposing something real, rough, raw, fear. Fear that everyone was seeing the real him. Fear that all the excuses were meaningless in the face of the cold truth. He hadn't been caught making a mistake. He had been caught being the mistake. Richard Maddox stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "Damian, Jasmine, I don't know what to do to fix this, but please give me a chance. This dealership needs a complete overhaul, not just in policies but in people." Jasmine looked at him. She didn't respond immediately. Then she turned to Damian silently. Damian nodded, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. Jasmine spoke softly but clearly. "I don't need you to fire anyone. I'm not here to demand honor. Honor is something I've never lost. But I want Ethan, and those like him, to experience what they've never dared to face, the truth of those who aren't privileged." She turned to Kenny. "And I want you, Kenny, to handle all the paperwork for my car purchase. That coupe, as I've said, it's for my sister." Kenny almost broke down in tears. I'm honored, Ms. Jasmine." Jasmine turned and walked away, leaving the room frozen like a statue. Damian followed her. But before he passed through the door, he turned back to look at Ethan. "You asked me yesterday why I came here. Now you know." A moment of silence. Then he added, this time, his voice softer, "She once told me I could become a better man. I'm still trying." "What about you?" Ethan lowered his head, and for the first time in his life, not because he lost, but because of shame. As Damian finished speaking, the automatic glass door behind him opened, and Jasmine walked out of the showroom, her steps still steady and calm, as if she had never been humiliated in that place, as if she were walking out of a trial where the one being judged wasn't her, but the very prejudiced gaze society had nurtured for so long. Damian also turned to leave, but Ethan, standing in the silence like a stone wall, finally couldn't endure the internal confinement any longer. "Wait, please, give me a chance." Ethan's voice was hoarse, no longer the confident tone of a seasoned salesman, but the voice of a man about to lose himself. Damian paused, turning his head. His gaze was no longer angry, just a silent observation, as if he were contemplating a soul struggling with its own conscience. Ethan stepped forward, awkwardly, his lips trembling. "I know I was wrong. Not just yesterday, maybe. For many years. I can't count how many times I've overlooked someone like Jasmine. How many times I let a glance decide someone's worth. But now, I really want to change. Please." Damian watched silently. Then he turned fully, his voice no longer cold, but with a clear force. Redemption doesn't come from an apology. It comes from action, from commitment, and from you standing in the very place you once used to look down on others. Ethan swallowed hard, bowing his head. The crowd of customers was still there, many watching in silence. But their gaze no longer held curiosity. It was as if they were waiting to see if this man had the strength to rise, not for honor, but for awakening. Damian looked at Richard Maddox, then, decisively, "I have 3 demands." Richard nodded, his face tense. "First, Kenny will be in charge of the entire car transaction, from negotiations, signing the contract to delivery. No one else is allowed to be involved." Richard glanced at Kenny, then nodded. "Understood? Kenny, do you agree?" Kenny, still in disbelief, could only nod, eyes brimming with tears. "I'm very honored, Mr. Cole." Damian continued. "Second, Ethan will attend the charity gala hosted by Jasmine next month, not as a guest, but as a volunteer." Ethan raised his head, momentarily stunned. "Oh, volunteer?" Damian nodded. his gaze not permitting negotiation. Serve drinks, set up chairs, push wheelchairs for the children who were once judged by society, just like you did to Jasmine. So, you can understand how easily arrogance comes and how hard compassion is to give. Ethan didn't speak. He only lowered his head once more. This time, it was a silence of agreement and a bow of humility. Damian took another step forward, speaking slowly. Finally, Montclair Motors must implement the implicit bias training program designed and taught by Jasmine herself. Mandatory for all employees, not just sales, but also the management team. Richard blinked, but then he nodded without hesitation. It will be done. I will personally attend the first session. Damian turned back to look at Ethan. His voice dropped, but it still held weight. You want to make amends? Then learn. Listen. And act not because you want forgiveness, but because you understand that you were hated until you prove otherwise. Ethan didn't respond. In his eyes, for the first time, was something unfeigned, genuine shame. No more anger, no more excuses. Just a man forced to remove the mask he had worn for too long. He nodded, a shaky nod, but enough to begin anew. Damian left the showroom without another word. Jasmine was waiting outside next to the Midnight Pearl Rolls. As he walked up to her, she didn't smile. But in her eyes there was something that he understood better than any gift he had ever owned. True respect, which can't be bought with money, can only be reclaimed through the way you walk through your mistakes. 3 weeks after the fateful day at Montclair Prestige Motors, the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Boston Hotel was illuminated by golden lights. Not because of the extravagant evening gowns or the white linen-draped tables, but because of the loud laughter, curious and shy glances, and sometimes radiant smiles from the disabled children living their first night at a party made just for them. Amid the crowd, Ethan Grant, the man who once walked as if he belonged in any room, now moved quietly, wearing a simple light blue shirt, a Hope Walker's volunteer vest, and carrying a tray of orange juice, bowing his head every time he passed someone. No more proud glances, no more shiny Italian shoes, just the tentative steps of a man relearning how to exist without stepping on others to stay upright. Jasmine spotted him from across the room. She stood next to a small stage where a young boy was passionately talking about his homemade robot. Jasmine held the program list in her hand, but her eyes still subtly glanced at the man in simple clothes, bending down to clean up a water spill next to a young girl's wheelchair. Ethan, awkwardly holding a napkin, was trying to dry the small, soiled wheel. The girl, around 9 years old with her hair tied in pigtails, watched him closely before suddenly asking, "Are you the janitor?" Ethan froze. A brief hesitation, then he laughed, for the first time in days, and gently replied, "I guess you could say that, little one. But I'm learning to be a good man first." The girl tilted her head, frowning. "Why do you have to learn? Don't grown-ups know how to be good?" The question made Ethan choke up, but he didn't answer. He just bent down, tightly twisted the cap of the water bottle, and handed it to her with both hands. "Thank you for asking. I'm still learning, and I don't have a teacher. But I think today I found a few people." No one needed to tell Ethan what to do. He cleaned up the dirty cups. He gathered the napkins. He took the children to the restroom. He helped parents push wheelchairs. No one recognized him as the executive manager of $1 million showroom, and he didn't need anyone to recognize that. For the first time, Ethan understood. True value is not in the role you hold, but in the person you choose to become. In the middle of the party, while everyone was listening to a speech from the hospital representative, Jasmine approached Ethan and handed him a soda. No awkward smile, no lecturing. Just a simple question, light as a breeze. How do you feel? Ethan didn't look up. His hand gripped the plastic cup lightly, the lights casting shadows on his cheeks, which had noticeably thinned over the past few weeks. I think I need to relearn how to be a human. From the beginning, step by step, no shortcuts. Jasmine didn't speak for a few seconds. Then she nodded. Good, but remember, learning to be human isn't a course with graduation. It's something you have to do for life, especially for those who forgot that for too long. Ethan nodded softly, like a student who's not the best, but knows how to listen. After the event, Ethan was tasked with escorting 3 children to the bus. One of them was Thomas, the boy in the wheelchair with muscular dystrophy, but his eyes shone brightly like a flashlight when talking about basketball. Before getting on the bus, Thomas grabbed Ethan's hand. "Are you going to the basketball practice on Saturday?" Ethan paused. I don't know how to play." "Then learn. You're grown up. Grown-ups have to learn their whole lives, right?" Ethan smiled, for the first time with a real smile. "Yeah, I think I'll start with you." Thomas nodded, like an experienced coach who just picked his new player. As the bus drove off, Ethan stood there watching for a long time. His eyes weren't red anymore, but deep, and when he turned back toward the hall where the lights had started to dim, he knew. His life wasn't forgiven, but it could be fixed, as long as he kept moving forward, without wearing a mask anymore. When the last bus pulled away from the Fairmont Hotel, leaving behind the fading lights and echoes of applause, Damian Cole stood motionless by the ground floor balcony, quietly watching. His gaze wasn't on the street, but focused on a figure, Jasmine, who was bent over speaking to a young mother, gently adjusting the coat of an autistic boy who had fallen asleep on his mother's shoulder. No one saw him smile. No one heard the soft sigh like the breeze through the fabric of his shirt. But everyone knew. That gaze was the only thing that had never changed in Damian over the past decade, since the day he lost Jasmine due to his own cowardice. He didn't come to reclaim love. He didn't need forgiveness. He came to do the right thing, not for her, but for the part of himself he had betrayed. And throughout the gala, he didn't once interrupt any of her conversations, nor did he take any private moments for himself. Damian simply stood back, occasionally helping the technicians adjust the sound system, discussing a new sponsorship package for the children's therapeutic playground, then quietly withdrawing after each task. No apologies, no explanations, just actions. And that gaze, still the same gaze from before. When Jasmine returned to the backstage, her shoulders slightly sore, her feet aching after nearly 5 hours of non-stop movement, she found Damian standing there, by an empty chair. No one spoke for a few seconds. He held out a cold bottle of water to her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Thank you for sending the email." His voice didn't tremble, but it lacked the confidence of the man who once ran a billion-dollar company. It was the voice of a man learning to stand before the person he once hurt, without expecting anything in return. Jasmine took the bottle of water. Her eyes were no longer cold. She looked at him, not as an ex-lover, but as a man doing the only thing she had ever hoped from him, being an ally. "Thank you for coming," she replied softly, then opened the bottle and took a sip. The two of them stood silently beside each other. No anger, no distance, but also no expectations. Just a silent acknowledgement that sometimes the right thing two people who once loved each other can do is to show up for a reason that's greater than themselves. A moment later, Jasmine asked quietly, "Are you planning to continue with the sponsorship program?" "Of course." Damian replied without hesitation. The entire company is preparing a long-term budget. This time, it's not a one-time investment for publicity. It's a genuine long-term partnership. Jasmine nodded. She didn't say, "Thank you." She knew he didn't need it. Instead, she turned to look directly at him, her eyes steady and clear, like the last time they looked at each other on the porch steps of the apartment when she said goodbye. "Damian, you're not the person you used to be, but I hope you haven't forgotten the person I once trusted." Damian lowered his eyes, his voice slow. "I haven't forgotten. I lost him once. Now I'm trying to find him again, little by little." Jasmine smiled softly, not bitterly, not with pity, but a smile from a woman who knows there are some things that don't need to be said anymore because they've been paid for through actions. Footsteps echoed behind them. Kenny ran over, his voice eager. "Miss Jasmine, Thomas says he wants to meet you to show the 3D design of the soccer field he drew himself. He says it's cooler than the one for the adults." "Oh, and Ethan." He's helping fold the napkins and said, "My back hurts, but my head feels lighter. Do you want to come see?" Jasmine laughed, her eyes sparkling. "Kenny, you should consider switching careers to event management." "I'm just following your lead," he blinked. "Learning by doing, right?" Jasmine glanced at Damian and nodded slightly. She turned and walked toward the back of the hall, where the first chairs were being cleared not to end the event, but to begin something more lasting than forgiveness, transformation. Damian paused for a moment, then began to walk. Not quickly, not slowly, but with the steps of a man who had removed his mask and no longer wanted to put it back on. Damian didn't wait for an answer. He simply bowed his head slightly to Jasmine, as if to make up for all the words he should have said in the past, but never had the courage to, then turned and walked into the night. No promises for the future, no desire to return, only a silent commitment to things greater than love, values, justice, and respect. And when Jasmine stood there, watching his figure fade into the empty hallway, she didn't shed a tear. No regret, but something inside her, something that had hardened after years of living alone, cracked open just a little. A part of her trust, thought to be dead, was breathing again. Gently, but enough to make her smile, even if very faintly. The next morning, as the October sunlight slanted through the showroom glass at Montclair Prestige Motors, a completely different scene was unfolding. There were no more sneers when simply dressed customers walked through the door. No more scanning eyes measuring the worth of a person from head to toe. No more cold arrogance that customers had once grown accustomed to. Instead, there was a busy, yet humble atmosphere. Richard Maddox, the dealership manager, who had once been obsessed with numbers and sales, now sat in the small conference room behind the showroom, listening to the bias trainer Jasmine had invited, discussing deep awareness and social reflex behavior. He didn't interrupt, didn't cross his legs. He sat up straight, hand on his notebook, writing down every word. Ethan was also present, in a gray shirt, no tie. His exhaustion from the gala the night before was evident, but in his eyes there was a new light that hadn't been there before, sincerity in listening. Kenny, now promoted to the official position of priority customer consultant, sat beside Ethan, helping him jot down additional notes when he saw Ethan's hand trembling slightly from fatigue. If a customer walks in and you don't see potential in them, the problem isn't with them, it's with you, the expert said. Ethan nodded. For the first time, he nodded without any defensiveness. During the break, Richard pulled Ethan out onto the balcony at the back of the showroom. He stood silently for a few seconds, then said, "I used to think a good manager was someone who knew how to pick the right people to serve. but I never thought I'd have to relearn how to see people. Ethan didn't argue. He slowly spoke. I think sometimes we need to be stripped of all privileges to realize that dignity isn't in the suit or the title, but in how we treat those who have nothing to give us. Richard nodded. His eyes were duller, but straighter. I want the next time Jasmine visits, she sees a place where she doesn't have to endure to be respected. I don't want to transform the showroom. I want to transform us. Ethan replied, and this time no one will need to step up to protect her, because we'll stand beside her, not behind her. That afternoon, Kenny received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a simple handwritten card. Thank you for not staying silent when silence was the easiest thing to do. You didn't just save me. You reminded me who I once wanted to be. Ethan. Kenny folded the card, smiling softly. He still wore his old sneakers, a wrinkled shirt, and his usual awkwardness. But now everyone called him the one who made Montclair change direction. He just smiled. I didn't do anything big. I just chose the right moment to not bow my head. A few weeks later, Jasmine visited the showroom again, this time not to buy a car, but to meet with the team after the final training session. When she entered, everyone stood up to greet her. No drama, no fanfare, just genuine eyes and a quiet gratitude. Damian was not there. He hadn't returned since the gala, but that no longer mattered, because what he left behind was the atmosphere, the trust, and an unspoken promise. If you ever need someone to protect the values you believe in, I will always be here. The policy named after her was not a title, nor was it a late attempt at redemption. Jasmine Turner Policy, formerly printed on the homepage of Montclair Prestige Motors, placed at the top of the customer service commitment section, without ornate designs or flowery language, just a single line as the title, Do not judge, do not discriminate. Every person deserves respect from the first glance. Below, it was a statement written by Ethan Grant, the former sales manager, who once represented everything this policy stood to oppose. I used to think that categorizing customers was necessary to work effectively. I was wrong. When we use appearances to decide who deserves to be served, we are losing the opportunity to truly be human. I apologized to Jasmine Turner, a woman who didn't need power to be respected, but forced an entire system to reconsider itself. I resign not because I was forced to, but because I need to relearn from the beginning how to serve with the heart, not by superficial standards. After the gala, Ethan never returned to the showroom. Instead, he accepted an offer from Damian, not for another managerial position, but to become a community advisor at Coltech Industries, overseeing the career integration program for people with special circumstances. Each week, he taught interns from low-income areas, teaching them not just how to work, but how to demand fair treatment. One day, when he entered a conference room with a slide presentation titled, I Was a Barrier, Now I Choose to Be a Bridge, Ethan briefly glanced at the cover photo. Jasmine's face, bent over to hand a card to a disabled boy. He said nothing, but smiled. At Montclair, the showroom now displayed a photo right behind the reception desk. Jasmine Turner and her sister, Carla Turner, taken on the day she received the Midnight Onyx Coupe. Carla, who had overcome breast cancer after 2 years of fighting, stood radiantly beside the car of her dreams. On the shirt's logo was a small Hope Walker's emblem, and on the back of the car was an engraved silver inscription, To Carla, you won twice. Jasmine didn't need a vengeance. She only needed a place where no one else had to suffer the silence she once swallowed. On the day the car was handed over, there were no journalists, no media, only Montclair staff and a few children from Hope Walkers clapping as Carla walked out of the showroom. Ethan didn't appear, but Kenny, on behalf of the entire team, handed over the keys in a small wooden box, with a single word engraved on the lid: dignity. Carla tightly held her sister's hand as they approached the car. "I never thought I'd be driving a car like this." Jasmine smiled, gently rubbing her sister's back. "It's not because it's expensive. It's because it's proof that you're never judged by the scar on your chest or the headscarf during chemotherapy. You fought, and you deserve it. Just like everyone else who has been looked down upon for not fitting any mold." Richard Maddox stood off to the side, nodding. He was no longer the head of a dealership, but someone who was relearning how to lead with humanity, not just with KPIs. He had initiated a scholarship program named after Jasmine Turner, funding automotive training tuition for women of color and single mothers. It was a gesture that didn't need accolades, but he believed that when employees looked up at it every day, they would remember that what really matters in the service industry is how you make customers feel about themselves. After the car handover ceremony, Jasmine stood alone in the hallway, holding the old silver ring Damian had given her many years ago. She didn't wear it, just kept it in her pocket like a memory neatly packed away. Damian wasn't there that day, but a bouquet of white flowers was sent to her, with no name of the sender, only a small note. "Don't look back at the past, just keep moving towards the right, and you've already gone ahead of all of us." Jasmine read it, then slipped the note into her pocket. She knew. True change doesn't need fireworks. It just needs to be quietly right and persistent. The midnight Onyx coupe glided smoothly along the shiny asphalt in front of Montclair Prestige Motors, reflecting the soft golden light of the October afternoon. Inside the car, Jasmine Turner gripped the steering wheel firmly, while beside her Carla, her younger sister, kept stroking the leather seats as if she couldn't believe this was real. "I don't think I deserve this," Carla whispered softly, her gaze still fixed ahead. "I used to believe that when my hair fell out and strangers looked at me with pity." Jasmine stayed silent for a few seconds before replying in a voice as soft as velvet. "They can look at you however they want, Carla, as long as you don't look at yourself the way they once did." The car rolled on, but in the rearview mirror, Jasmine still caught sight of Kenny waving goodbye in front of the showroom. His face beamed, not because of completing a transaction, but because he had done the right thing and saw the results. Further away, by the edge of the grass near the sidewalk, was Damian, not approaching, not waving, not inserting himself into any spotlight. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, his gaze deep and quiet, no longer expecting an invitation, no longer longing to return. Just a pure sense of peace seeing the woman he once let down, now standing on the peak of her own dignity. Jasmine didn't smile, but her gaze no longer held defensiveness. She drove on, never looking back. Because true dignity doesn't need justification or external validation. It exists, and it shines every time we refuse to diminish ourselves to fit someone else's prejudices. A week later, in a small lecture hall at Suffolk University in Boston, Jasmine stood before over 100 senior students majoring in community development, holding a microphone and wearing a name tag that read, "Keynote Speaker, Jasmine Turner, founder of Hope Walkers." There were no flashy stage lights, no promotional videos, just her, in a simple white shirt, slacks, and worn leather shoes that had once been judged. "I'm not here to tell you an inspirational story," Jasmine began, her tone calm. "I'm here to remind you that there will be times when what you believe in will be seen as weakness. There will be times when people look at you and only see what they think is lacking. But if I've learned anything from all of this, it's this: you can't control the world's gaze. but you can control how you see yourself. And if you hold on to that, you will never truly fail. In the last row, Ethan Grant sat listening. Not introduced, no name tag, just a guest badge. But that didn't matter. He just listened intently, like a student who had missed too many years of class and was now trying to relearn every chapter. After the talk, Ethan didn't approach the stage. But in the hallway corner, when Jasmine stepped down, he left a folded piece of paper on the refreshment table. It had just one handwritten line. "Thank you for not holding a grudge, but keeping the door open." Jasmine didn't need to respond. She simply took the paper, put it in her bag, and walked away. Because every small action she had taken, from sending the email without any blame, to inviting the man who once humiliated her to push a wheelchair at the gala, was how she was sewing back the values she wanted to see in the world. Not to be repaid, but to return dignity to those who had it taken away, even to those who caused it, if they had the courage to look back. When the midnight Onyx coupe rolled once more toward the campus, where Carla was now volunteering for the post-cancer recovery program, Jasmine turned on the radio. A voice came through. "Welcome to Moment of Sincerity. Today, we share a question. Who was the first person to make you look back at yourself?" Jasmine didn't need to think. Not Damian, not Ethan, not the system, but herself. The one who refused to stay silent. The one who reclaimed dignity without shouting a word. And that is the journey of Jasmine Turner, a single mother who was once judged for her simple appearance, but made an entire system bow down and change. She didn't need power, didn't need revenge, just unwavering commitment to her own values. What about you? Have you ever been judged by your appearance, or seen someone treated unfairly just because they didn't fit the standard? Share your story below, because who knows, your experience might awaken someone who needs to listen. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share it with those you think should watch, and subscribe to the channel to not miss out on more meaningful and inspiring stories. Remember, true value doesn't lie in your wallet or appearance. It lies in how you behave when you think no one is watching.